Good morning to Moon Meditation and more. We're doing the Flower Ornament Scripture, Part 3, page 6, and we're on the third paragraph. I'm sorry, second paragraph. So we left off at, it directly points out at once to people of the highest faculties the basic knowledge of the unique cosmos of reality, the qualities of Buddhahood. This is its way of teaching and enlightenment. It does not discuss such phenomena as producing consciousness according to illusion. And according to the Saddharma Pundarika scripture, Buddha appears in the world to enlighten people with Buddha knowledge and purify them, not for any other religious vehicle, no second or third vehicle. And also it says that Buddha does not acknowledge the understanding of the essence and characteristics of Buddha by people of the three vehicles. Therefore, the Saddharma Pundarika scripture says, as for the various meanings of essence and characteristics, only I and the other Buddhas of the 10 directions know them. My disciples, individual illuminates, and even non-regressing enlightening beings cannot know them. Because the Saddharma Pundarika scripture joins the temporary studies of the three vehicles and brings them ultimately to the true realm of the reality of the Buddha vehicle, its doctrine to some extent matches that of the Flower Ornament scripture. The Flower Ornament scripture directly reveals the door of consummate Buddhahood, the realm of reality, the fundamental essence and function of the cosmos, communicating this to people of the superior faculties so that they may awaken to it. It does not set up the provisional didactic device of 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 consciousnesses like the Sandinirmakana scripture does. As for the Sandinirmakana scripture's establishment of a ninth pure consciousness, there are two meanings. For one thing, it is for the sake of those of the two lesser vehicles who have long sickened of birth and death and cultivate emptiness to annihilate consciousness, aiming directly for empty quiescence. Also in the next phase, the Pranaparamita scriptures talk a lot about emptiness and refute the notion of existence to turn around the minds of the two vehicles as well as enlightening beings engaged in gradual study. They also make the 6 ways of transcendence the vehicle of practice. And although some of those in the two vehicles are converted, they and the gradual practice enlightening beings are predominantly inclined toward emptiness. This is because the elementary curative teachings for the gradual study enlightening beings are similar to some extent to those for the lesser vehicles. They do have, however, a bit more compassion than the latter. They have not yet realized principles such as that of the body of reality, the Buddha nature, and fundamental knowledge. They only take the avenue of emptiness as their vehicle of salvation and the 6 ways of transcendence as their form of practice. Their elementary curative means are after all the same as the two vehicles. Only by contemplation of impermanence, impurity, bleached bones, atoms, and so on do they enter contemplation of emptiness. But while the two vehicles head for extinction, enlightening beings stay in life. They subdue notions of self and phenomena by means of contemplations of voidness, selflessness, and so on. Basically, this is not yet fundamental knowledge of the body of reality and the Buddha nature because their vision is not yet true. Inclination toward emptiness is dominant, and for this reason, the Sandinirmakana scripture expediently sets up a pure consciousness distinct from the conceptual, judgmental, and cumulative consciousnesses, saying that these consciousnesses rest on the pure consciousness. The Sandinirmakana scripture does not yet directly explain that the impressions in the cumulative or repository consciousness are the matrix of enlightenment. This is because the students are engaged in learning out of fear of suffering, and if they were told that the seeds of action are eternally real, they would become afraid and wouldn't believe it. So the scripture temporarily sets up a pure consciousness so that they won't annihilate the conscious nature and will grow in enlightenment. For this reason, The Vimalakirtinderdesa scripture says they have not yet fulfilled Buddhahood, but they don't annihilate sensation to get realization. Since sensation is not annihilated, neither are conception and consciousness. As for Lankavatara scripture, it does directly tell those whose faculties are mature that the seeds of action in the cumulative storehouse consciousness are the matrix of enlightenment. The Vimalakirti Desa scripture says the passions which accompany us are the seeds of Buddhahood. The passions which accompany us are the seeds of Buddhahood. People who practice the way are different on different paths, with myriad different understandings and ways of acting beyond the two vehicles that are called the lesser vehicles. The vehicle of enlightening beings has four types that are not the same. One is that of enlightening beings who cultivate emptiness and selflessness. Second is that of enlightening beings who gradually see the Buddha nature. Third is that of enlightening beings who see Buddha nature all of a sudden. Fourth is those enlightening beings who, by means of the inherently pure knowledge of the enlightened, and by means of the various levels of intensive practice, develop differentiating knowledge, fulfill the practice of universal good, and develop great benevolence and compassion. As for the Lankavarta scripture, its teaching is based on 5 elements: 3 natures, 8 consciousnesses, and twofold selflessness. The 5 elements are forms, names, arbitrary conceptions, correct knowledge, and thusness. The 3 natures are the nature of mere imagination, the nature of relative existence, and the nature of absolute emptiness. The imaginary nature means the characteristics of things as we conceive of them are mere descriptions, projections of the imagination. The relative nature means that things exist in terms of the relation of sense faculties, sense data, and sense consciousness. The absolute nature means that the imaginary and relative natures are not in themselves ultimately real. The 8 consciousnesses are the 5 sense consciousness, like the heat, right? The conceptual consciousness, the discriminating judgmental consciousness, and the cumulative or repository storehouse consciousness. The twofold selflessness is the selflessness of persons and of things. According to the scripture, there is a mountain in the South Seas called Lanka, where the Buddha expounded this teaching. This mountain is high and steep and looks out over the ocean. There is no way of access to it, so only those with spiritual powers can go up there. This represents the teaching of the mind ground, to which only those beyond cultivation and realization can ascend. Looking out over the ocean represents the ocean of mind being inherently clear, while waves of consciousness are drummed up by the wind of objects. The scripture wants to make it clear that if you realize objects are inherently empty, the mind ocean will be naturally peaceful when mind and objects are both still. Everything is revealed, just as when there is no wind, the sun and moon are clearly reflected in the ocean. The Lankavarta scripture is intended for enlightening beings of mature faculties, all at once telling them that active consciousness bearing seed like impressions is the matrix of enlightenment. Because these enlightening beings are different from the practitioners of the 2 lesser vehicles who annihilate consciousness and seek quiescence, and because they are different from the enlightening beings of the Pranaparamita scriptures who cultivate emptiness and in whom the inclination toward emptiness is dominant, this scripture directly explains the total reality of the fundamental nature of the substance of consciousness, which then becomes the function of knowledge. So just as when there is no wind, no on the ocean.